Welcome guys to another chess analysis. Now, as we all know, Magnus Carlsen is one of, if not the greatest chess player of all time. He started playing tournaments when he was 9, and a year later he was already rated over 2000. It's just insane. Either way, somehow, he kept this unhuman rate of improvement, and by the time he was 14, he was already a GM. And fast forward 2 years later, it's 2006, and he leads us to this game, where Magnus Carlsen has already a ridiculous 2675 rating, and he's facing a strong Swiss Grandmaster rated about 2600, Yannick Pelletier. Now, you're in for a treat as something quite amazing happened in this game, but yeah, buckle up and let's just get into it. So Magnus Carlsen had the black pieces, and Pelletier with white started the game with d4. Magnus replied with knight f6, and he goes for the Indian defense. Now, I don't want to delve too much into theory, but these Indian systems are what we call hypermodern openings. And what is an hypermodern opening, you ask? Well, traditional openings defend that you should occupy the center and control it as soon as you can, and then, develop your pieces and enjoy a nice game. However, hypermodern openings instead defend that you should prioritize developing your pieces at all costs. It doesn't even matter that you surrender the center to white. Because, for example, a traditional line here would be something like c4, white just seizes total control of the center, but black doesn't care, it just keeps normal development. We go g6, white can go knight c3, but now bishop g7, e4, and we just go d6, we control these pawn pushers, right? Next, we're just gonna castle, and eventually undermine and challenge white's center with moves like c5. And if we take a look, we basically have already our kingside development finished. Then, we're slowly but surely going to develop our pieces and just destroy white's center. If we get rid of this pawn somehow, we're doing very, very well. So yeah, those are the ideas behind these hypermodern openings. However, white is of course familiar with this, so instead he plays knight f3 and, just keeps his options open. Now Magnus replies with d6, and after c4, he could transpose into something like a queen's gambit with d5. However, with these hypermodern ideas in mind, he just plays b6, wanting to fianchetto his bishop and turn it into an amazing sniper, and yeah, this is the famous Queen's Indian defense. Now, right in the same fashion replies with b3, looking to oppose Magnus's bishop, and instead of fianchettoing, Magnus first plays bishop to b4, checking the black king, and yeah, looking to get rid of his dark square bishop, because in these types of structures, this dark square bishop would usually get stuck behind the black's wall of pawns, and yeah, he'd just be useless. So after bishop to d2, we have bishop takes, queen takes, and yeah, Magnus gladly accepted the trade. Now Magnus here, instead of fianchettoing the bishop, first played bishop to a6, tickling this white pawn on c4. White had to defend it, we have knight to a3, and after castles, white played bishop to g2, just, creating some menacing threats here on this diagonal. So Magnus had to finally put it on b7, and white simply put his king to safety as well. So far, pretty normal game. Now Magnus continues with d6, and notice the importance of getting rid of the dark square bishop. Now he's no longer blocked. And this d6 move is very important because it not only sort of controls the pawns here in the center, but most importantly, it also creates this square for the knight to be developed, because Magnus didn't really want to put it on c6 because it will just block his sniper. So now if we take a look at white's position, the rooks are the only thing that's not developed, so white works on it. We have rook a to d1, black continues with this pawn, we have knight b to d7, white now develops the other rook, we have rook f to e1, Magnus plays queen to e7, connecting the rooks, just finishing developing, pretty standard stuff. White plays knight to h4, just trying to trade these bishops, and Magnus accepts it. We have bishop takes on g2, knight takes on g2, and now Magnus, tired of waiting, finally strikes in the center and plays c5. White replies with knight e3, and it's actually pretty important that he did not release the tension here, because if he did, well, just pawn retakes, and if we take a look, pretty much all of black's problems have been solved. He'll just bring the rooks to the open file and enjoy a pretty equal game. It's actually very dry. No pawn imbalances, the pawns are on the same squares, 2 knights versus 2 knights, so yeah, kinda dry. Instead, in the game, we have knight e3, controlling this d5 push, that would get Magnus really just a lot of space, and Magnus now gets to work on finishing development. He plays rook f to d8, white plays knight to b4, just aiming to put this knight on a more active square. He really wasn't doing anything on a6. Perhaps he can go to b5, then to go to c3. And Magnus here actually plays a pretty interesting move. He plays pawn takes on d4, and this move usually can't be played, because now simply queen takes on d4 that was played in the game, and after knight to c5, well, it looks like the d6 pawn is kind of hanging, right? Because if we know how to count, there's 3 pieces attacking it and only 2 pieces defending. However, in this position it can actually be played, because if the knight is to take, we can realize that there's a mighty pain here on the d file to the queen, so white is kind of in trouble, because now we simply need to attack the knight, for example knight to e8, and now it's the opposite. 2 pieces defending the knight, right, and 3 pieces attacking it. The knight ain't going nowhere and it can't really be defended, so yeah, bye-bye knight and bye-bye game for white. Instead, in the game, white tried to be clever and played queen f4, trying to hit the pawn sideways, and now he really is threatening to take because there's no longer a pin, right? But obviously, Magnus Carlsen, even though he's 16, he's already a pretty clever guy, as we know. So he played knight c to e4 and defended the pawn this way. However, if you're paying attention, you can realize that this knight is kind of vulnerable here on e4, because white can technically play something like f3, kicking the knight, and after the knight goes back, well, you can simply gain the pawn, right? And white is pretty much winning. He just got a pawn for nothing. However, it's usually not that simple when you're playing Magnus Carlsen, because Magnus realized when he played knight c to e4, the queen is kind of restricted. For example, here, all of these squares are taken, right? So she only has access to h4 and f3. So if white plays f3, she takes one of her last squares. She can only go to h4. And turns out Magnus was planning to play g5, and the queen is actually trapped here. Like, that's crazy. So white obviously realized this, and in the game he tried to continue being clever. He played knight to g4, trying to hit this knight. If Magnus plays a random move, just knight takes. This knight is forced to retake because he's now hanging. But now simply just taking this pawn will probably win the game for white. Magnus would have no compensation. So obviously Magnus doesn't play a random move. Instead it takes this knight. White simply takes the knight on e4, and now that the other knight is attacked, he simply goes back to f6, hitting the queen. Queen goes back to f3, and now we arrive in a position that was kind of innocent. Not a lot of things happening. However, it still has a lot of poison, because if Magnus plays a calm move, say h6, just a natural passing move creating a square for his king that might be useful later on, well, turns out white was threatening to take this pawn, because Magnus can't take the knight, otherwise this other rook in the corner is dead. So Magnus has to be pretty careful here, and if he plays something like rook a to c8, just dodging the queen's attack, well, there's things like queen a6, just forking these pawns, right? So it isn't really pleasant for Magnus. Instead, Magnus just played knight to e8, and it's kind of a passive move, but it just glues everything together. You know, it reinforces the d6 pawn, and white really has nothing here. He tried going for a4, just gaining some space here on the queen side, and Magnus finally develops his rook. He plays rook a to c8, because now white doesn't have those fork shenanigans, since this line is now blocked. This also comes with an attack on the c pawn, so white simply plays c3, defends this pawn. Magnus gets this knight back into the game. He plays knight to s6. He's no longer needed protecting this pawn, and white puts his knight on c3, now that he's no longer blocking the c pawn. Now here, this position is actually quite boring. There's not a lot to do. So now here Magnus plays h6, just creates that square for the king, might be useful later on, and kind of passes the move, to be fair. White continues with rook to d3. It's a completely valid move, just aims to double along the d file, and now Magnus has already something to work on. And what if I told you Magnus will sort of win the game in like 2 or 3 moves? Well, not really, because white didn't resign, but he will gain a crushing advantage in like 2 moves. It's crazy, because here Magnus played knight to d7. He now has something to work on, right? He's trying to rotate his knight to e5 to, fork the queen and the rook. That would be nice. However, white saw this plan, and to this he had prepared queen to b7. because this looks like it's pretty annoying, right? As far as I can see, the knight is pinned to the queen, and the queen is also hitting this pawn. And if you try protecting the pawn, say with something like rook to a8, oh, this rook is coming to the e file, and you're not going to have fun defending the d6 pawn, because it's an extremely weak pawn, right? You can never move this knight, because your queen is just dead. So back here, instead of defending the pawn, Magnus actually found an insane move, actually, the reason I'm making this video. So it's a move that at first glance it doesn't make any sense. How could a move like that even make an advantage? However, it's the only move that wins in this position. And Stockfish gives like a -2 in this position for black. So yeah, it doesn't look like black has anything. How can black have something in this position? However, Magnus had everything worked out. And yeah, Magnus is just Magnus. But if you want, try to emulate what 16-year-old Magnus found. Pause the video and give it your best. Okay, so in this position, the move is actually queen to f8. Like, what? This move looks like it's absolutely just throwing. Because you're legitimately just undeveloping your queen. How can this be the only move that wins here? It's insane. But okay, let's take it one step at a time. Here in this position, Magnus really wanted to play knight to c5 because it would fork the rook and the queen. However, he can't, so he has to move the queen somewhere to, prepare the knight going to c5. However, if you play queen to f6 or queen to g5, this pawn is kind of falling. And for example, knight to e4 will hit the queen and then take this pawn. So here black's position is just completely falling apart. So this queen to f8 basically is the only move that keeps in touch with this pawn. So in this position, white's possibilities are either to move this rook and avoid the fork, move the queen and avoid the fork, or play knight to e4 protecting c5, right? However, if knight to e4, just d5 and white is lost. Because now the knight is 8, and if you take this pawn, just queen to b4, and there's a fork here, and there's nothing white can do. So instead in the game, white said, okay, I need to move either the rook or the queen, no problem, because my intentions were actually just to take this pawn. So now you're down a pawn, how are you going to go about this, Magnus? Well, turns out the young prodigy had something prepared up his sleeve, because here he played again the only move that wins, knight to c5. He goes for knight to c5 anyway, because he hits the rook. Rook is forced to move, but now this queen is, sort of trapped again. It's the second time in this game Magnus finds a team like this, where the queen is sort of trapped. But if Magnus attacks it right away, well, just queen takes on b6, and she's kind of running away. Instead, Magnus prepares the idea and plays like the only move that wins here as well. He plays rook to c6, and yeah, now this pawn is protected, the diagonal is just blocked, and if we take a look, where the hell is this queen going? She cannot go here, she cannot go here, she cannot go here, she cannot go to any of these. They're all taken, and yeah, rook is just gonna slide to a8, and it's a dead queen. And white here realized it, and he could resign, but he decided to play on a little bit. He tried going for a5, we have rook a8, and yeah, now the pawn takes, we have rook takes queen, and after pawn retakes, white is just desperately gonna try to promote this pawn, but it isn't really gonna work, because Magnus just blocks the pawn, also attacks it, we have queen to a8, white just defends it, we have rook to a1, but now this pawn on b3 is also falling. We have knight takes on b3, rook is forced to move, he was it, we have rook a4 defending this pawn, but now Magnus just increases the pressure, he plays knight d2, hits it once again, and yeah, white is just dead here. He tries playing knight b5, just throwing pieces at Magnus and trying to create something, but now just knight takes on c4, rook to b1, and there's one final trick here that Magnus has to dodge, and that is if Magnus just decides to be careless and plays a natural looking move like e5, turns out there's knight to c7 here, and yeah, the queen is it, so you kind of have to do something about it, but If you take the knight, well, just rook to b8, and this comes with a check, right? So you'd have to take, but then the pawn just takes, it promotes to a queen, and Magnus would terribly lose this game. So instead, Magnus obviously sees it, and he just plays king h7, escapes from all the checks, and now, yeah, there's really nothing to do. He just played f3, and now after that d5 move I was talking about, he just resigned the game, because it's just a matter of time till Magnus organizes his pieces and collects this a7 pawn. So yeah, nothing to do here, and Magnus won pretty incredible game with that fantastic, just ridiculous move back here, this queen f8 that looks so goofy, like you're undeveloping a piece. This is not how we teach chess, like it's just amazing. But yeah, the genius somehow makes it work and makes it seem easy, like always. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed and maybe learned something new. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing and leaving me some feedback down below. It really helps. But yeah, catch you on the next one. Bye.